Okay, hello, my friends. Today is Tuesday, September 24th, and here's your Ukraine war news for today. This is the daily brief. It looks like there is more movement on the battlefield, or at least the Russians are trying to engage more. There's 1,400 Russian casualties day over day, 16 tanks. Remember, replacement value for tanks is about 4 per day for the Russians. 40 armored fighting vehicles, 61 artillery systems, 73 vehicles and fuel tanks. It's really it feels like it has ticked up, and you can see this too. Who is this? This was Jay in Kiev that pointed this out, confirming the recent videos. The general staff reports are coming in hard and heavy with Russian armor and personnel losses near highs of the war, and he highlights the same things that I tend to highlight here. And yeah, I mean, you can see in the numbers reflected what the battlefield reality. Okay, this is the British Ministry of Defense, and I just want to show you their timeline of casualties. This is Russian casualties over time. And yeah, you can see that just tick up and tick up and tick up. And this is where we are now in 2024. So it wasn't that much in 2022, 2023. It elevated 2024. These meat wave assaults it's just devastating. Okay, Ukrainian Air Force reports on the large drone attack overnight. None of the missiles, there's 4 missiles, and again, we talked about this just yesterday. The replacement value for missiles is about 5 a day. They can generate about 5 a day. And then the replacement value for drones, for Shahed drones built in Russia, is about 16 or 17 per day, and they sent 81 last night. They only sent like 6 the night before or something like that. So it felt like, well, what's going on? Are they building for a bigger attack? Well, here's a bigger attack. 81 Shahed drones, and they shot down 66. They said another 13 were lost in Ukrainian territory due to electronic warfare measures. Okay, the Shaheds are not all that effective, but they can keep shooting them at them and creating damage. Okay, Russia's new Sarmat missile, ballistic missile, blows up during a test launch. We talked about that the other day. This is supposed to be a big bad nuclear threat. And then I saw this in my news feed. So in my news feed, when I'm looking at hard news, I include Pravda and TASS and RT just to see read the other side's mail, see what they're saying. Sarmat missile test in Arkhangelsk makes Western media shudder. No, it made the Western media laugh. Now they changed the headline to Western media report explosion of Putin's super missile at the Cosmodrome, but that's not what was going on. The Western media was more laughing at that than shuddering. Okay, Russia is now sending around 3,000 glide bombs a month into the people of Ukraine, only because the Biden administration forbids Ukraine from striking Russian airfields. Yeah, those glide bombs are pretty brutal. And Jay in Kiev says a year from now it'll be 10,000 a month, and then 20,000 a month, and so on. Okay, we don't know what the numbers are, but appeasing tends to only increase a desire on Putin's part to do more. I mean, I think that's fair. Um, Polish airspace has been violated, Romanian airspace has been violated, but when the Japanese airspace has been violated, the Japanese actually decided, you know what, we're not going to do this. Japanese fighter jets used infrared countermeasures to intercept a Russian Il-38 aircraft. A Russian Il-38 patrol aircraft violated our airspace over territorial waters north of Rebun Island 3 times. Japanese defense minister said, according to Japanese authorities, the Russian aircraft stayed in Japanese airspace for about a minute each time. In response, F-35 fighter jets were raised on alert and used infrared countermeasures several times. Okay, and the violation of Japanese airspace by the Russian aircraft occurred against the backdrop of joint exercises between naval forces of Russia and China, which took place in the Sea of Japan 2 days ago, September 21st to 22nd. Chiara also explained that it was the first documented incursion of Russian aircraft into our airspace since June of 2019. So the Russians are just, they're like toddlers pushing to figure out where the boundaries are before they get in trouble. Well, they just keep pushing the boundaries. So they fired warning flares at the Russian military reconnaissance plane, which I thought was pretty interesting. And here it is in the Guardian, the same article. I thought it was pretty interesting that Japan was the one to fight back rather than, or not fight back, to push back against it rather than, escorting a drone back into Ukrainian territory. That's just unbelievably bad and inviting more of the same. Ukrainian military sources confirmed that Russian units managed to enter the first outskirts of Volodar after months of intense fighting in this direction. They said there was no major offensive as such. Small enemy assault groups managed to penetrate the city, so we can conclude that at the moment there is a gray area. But that does mean that the Russians are moving forward in some way. Ukraine advanced into Russia's Kursk Oblast. Meanwhile, Russian forces gained ground near Donetsk Oblast, Kupiansk, and Pokrovsk, adopting defensive posture north of Kharkiv Oblast and increasing offensive near Volodar. So let's look at the Volodar bit. So here's Volodar, and they're actually gaining a little bit of ground there. That is happening. So this is Volodar, and what you want to look at is what their big objective here is Pokrovsk. In fact, let's look at Pokrovsk. Okay, this is Pokrovsk recently on the map, and if we just go back about a month, we see this. Okay, so here it is today, and here's what it was a month ago, and here's what it was a few months back in May. And here, so if we look at May, and then we look at where they're going in just by May to August, it looks like, wow, Pokrovsk over here is going to get it, but then they just start spreading out instead of forward. And I can't figure out for the life of me why they're doing this when they know that winter's coming and they really want to achieve that, but they're like fooling around down here and up here in the north. It just doesn't make sense, but it's good. I mean, it's slow. Anything that slows their momentum toward Pokrovsk gives Pokrovsk a greater chance of being able to hold through winter. Okay, so that's where we are. Ukrainian military detects, I find this fascinating. The Ukrainian military detects 12,000 targets every week thanks to artificial intelligence. Now, I'm focused on artificial intelligence to some degree for academic purposes. I'll be delivering a paper on Thursday about the use of AI, but the Ukrainians are using it for defense purposes. Defense forces automatically detect 12,000 units of enemy equipment every week thanks to the Avengers Artificial Intelligence Platform, which was developed by the Innovation Center of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. This result is achieved by automatic analysis of video from drones and stationary cameras. We currently have the world's most advanced adversarial video data platform. I bet they do, and they're figuring out how to make this kind of thing work because they have to. Meanwhile, the Russians are using Chinese armored vehicles in Ukraine. Now, are they getting them directly from China? No, it looks like they're getting them perhaps through intermediaries in Africa, but still, it's Chinese vehicles on the ground in Ukraine. Russia's endless waves of impoverished meat pouring into Ukraine will soon be matched by unmanned armored robot tech from a civilized and free people. So what you're seeing here is that. Like this is the future of warfare. These unmanned vehicles are essentially, it's like first-person shooter games, but for real. And these vehicles, I've seen these with AK-47s and rocket-propelled grenades and things like. Yeah, that's what's going to be happening. Yeah, okay. Meanwhile, Russian propagandists are saying, let's eliminate all those who unleash this war, which is ominous, generalized threats toward the West. I don't think that there should be those left in this world who have unleashed this war. Let's solve these questions. We can do it. Huh, how about that? No one left to unleash the war. Well, I kind of agree, but I think those that unleashed the war were Russian. I don't know. Okay, this is what Russian liberation looks like. And this is why this is important, because wherever the Russians go in defending Russians in Ukraine, it has the same devastating outcome. Zelensky was signing rockets in the factory in the United States yesterday. I showed that in the video. You can sign a rocket on the battlefield at Sign My Rocket. Now, I'm not familiar with this organization, but Jason J. Smart, I trust to be providing something useful. Here's with love from Jason J. Smart. Rest in pieces. So you can have your rocket signed, or mortar or whatever signed, and artillery, that sort of thing. Okay. I'm not sure what I think about this. It says reinventing ways of moving on the battlefield. To me, this looks impractical, but they may know something that I don't know. But I got to give them props for at least trying to be innovative. Going into a battlefield situation on something like that seems not all that plausible, not all that useful. The Russians aren't that smart driving a motorcycle into a combat situation, but I guess going between places if you need to, maybe. I don't know. Okay, if NATO members followed Lithuania and increased defense spending to at least 3% of GDP, this is Gabriel Landsbergis, he's the foreign minister of Lithuania, I think the grandson of the former prime minister, there would be an extra 270 billion available for supporting Ukraine and defending NATO's borders. That's quite a bit. I hear this is politically impossible, but here's how Lithuania did it. And before we look at that, let's look at spending. This is Britain in World War II at about 50%. Ukraine is at 37%. NATO at 2.7%. Come on, NATO, let's go. Okay, so he said this: public support for defense spending requires a new social contract and widespread understanding of the risks of inaction. In Lithuania, we understand the risk of Russian aggression far too well. Our civilians died under T-72 tanks. They remember. This is why the Baltic states are so hawkish, because they remember the experience. In countries with no experience of occupation by Russia, there's a tendency to underestimate the risks to all of Europe that are being posed by this regional conflict. It's just a regional conflict. No, it's not. It's global. It can absorb all of us if it's not handled properly. Such terminology is incorrect. This is now a global struggle for the rules-based freedom and prosperity. Okay, Russia, with the help of allies, Iran, Belarus, North Korea, is already rebuilding, not just threatening to bounce back, but preparing to win. They really are preparing to win, and that's the misery here. And we're asleep at the wheel. Peace in Ukraine is not a matter of ownership of Donbass. Putin is never stopped by peace agreements. His appetite for land doesn't decrease however much you throw to him. Yes, there are historical analogs for annexations, and no, they didn't bring peace. But even if leading politicians explain the risks, voters still might not accept the cost of effective deterrence because they worry that their taxes will be diverted away from services that they use daily. So that's why we need to rethink a social contract. I think it needs the message, at least in the U.S., has not sunk in enough to know that these are the stakes. This is what you're dealing with. And Biden is now facing pressure to allow Ukraine to use longer-range strikes on Russia. Finland's president, NATO Secretary General, UK Prime Minister are all urging him to loose restrictions. If you want to do so, just Google "contact White House." And then when you go from there, you fill in a form, share your thoughts with the president, and let's just do this. So share a comment, message, or opinion with the president. So we click there, and what do we want to talk about? Ukraine. And then you put in, what would you like to say? Please let Ukraine strike back in Russia so they can win. Thank you. Now, that wasn't a very elaborate message, but I don't need to send an elaborate message. They're just going to simply tabulate how many people are supporting, and that's how they make decisions in DC. So if you feel moved to do that, that's how you go about doing that. Okay, last little bit. Here's Darth Putin. The front line is moving toward Moscow. I remain master strategist. Well, it's not moving that far or that fast, but it's interesting to see how that 3-day or 3-week special military operation has been lasting into 31 months. All right, my friends, that's all that we have. Thanks for your time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes. I greatly appreciate it when you hit that like button or when you share one of these videos. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.